For decades, you were told the great white shark sits at the top of the Pacific, the animal nothing above the water can touch. Something's been rewriting that. Off California, off Baja, off the open coast, white sharks keep washing up with a clean incision from pectoral to pectoral and one specific organ missing. It's been filmed, it's been necropsied, it's been quietly logged. The identity of the predator isn't the mystery. The mystery is that the behavior shouldn't biologically exist at this frequency or precision. 4 cases ahead, a landmark event, a forensic signature, a vanishing, and a reframe. Here's who I'm talking to. If you dive, if you fish the West Coast, if you've stood over a stranded shark and thought something about the cut didn't match the story you were told, this is for you. If you're a skeptic who's rolled your eyes at every orca attack clip that made the rounds, stay. I'm not going to ask you to believe anything. I'm going to walk you through the evidence stack and let you decide what survives. Start with the Farallon Islands, October 1997. A whale watch boat off the coast of San Francisco. Researchers on deck, a group already tuned to the surface behavior of large marine mammals. What they saw wasn't a fight, it was surgical. A killer whale held a subadult great white at the surface, upside down, immobile. Then it fed. There are photographs, there is video, there are field notes from a research operation that had spent years at that specific location. At the time, the reaction from the wider marine biology community was measured, not dismissive. The consensus held that orcas and white sharks generally avoided each other. There was no forensic pattern to compare against, no repeat footage, no documented technique. The incident sat in the record as remarkable but singular, an anomaly. That was a reasonable read of the data as it existed in 1997. Here's the part that reasonable read didn't account for. In the days after the attack, the great white sharks tagged at the Farallones stopped showing up on the receivers. Not one of them, the entire tracked aggregation, some for the rest of the season, some longer, and they hadn't followed the prey elsewhere. The prey was still there. The temperature was still right. They had made a decision, a single documented predation event, and a whole population's worth of the ocean's supposed apex predator relocated. That's not how an apex predator responds to a one-off. That's how prey responds. And that single detail, the vanishing after the event, is what quietly moved the case from anomaly to clue. Which brings me to what has been washing up on Pacific beaches. Here's the signature. A great white shark, sometimes intact from the head, sometimes recovered fresh, opened by a single clean incision running roughly pectoral to pectoral. No shredding, no feeding damage along the flanks. And one specific thing missing, the liver. On a large white shark, the liver can weigh hundreds of pounds. It's the largest organ, extraordinarily calorie-dense, packed with squalene, an efficient energy store. Whatever removed it did so without appearing to want anything else. The flesh, the fins, the muscle, untouched. It's a targeted extraction. I want you to notice what's not there. There's no bite pattern along the incision edge that matches a shark. There's no chunk pattern that matches scavenging. And when researchers necropsied a series of these carcasses across the Pacific Rim over the last decade, the pattern held. It's the same signature documented in South Africa, where 2 specific male orcas, the animals known publicly as port and starboard, have been repeatedly connected to livered white shark carcasses along the Western Cape coastline. Different ocean, same cut, same organ. Now let me be honest about what the skeptical filter dissolves. Some livered carcasses on Pacific beaches almost certainly aren't orca kills. Scavengers can open a soft belly and get to the liver. Some of the earliest cases were assumed to be shark-on-shark predation, which does happen. Some carcasses have been too degraded to reach any confident conclusion. If you're skeptical of blanket claims, you're right to be. Not every livered shark is a courtroom-grade orca kill. Here's what survives the filter. There are cases where drone footage captured the event in progress. There are cases where the surgical geometry of the incision, one clean cut, one specific organ, no secondary damage, is inconsistent with scavenging. There are cases matched to orcapods sighted in the same waters within hours. The residue is small, it exists, and that residue is enough to move this out of opportunistic anomaly and into documented technique, which is the second thing I want you to sit with. Techniques don't emerge randomly. Techniques get learned, refined, and, in citations, passed on. So if you've walked a Pacific beach and stood over a shark with a clean belly and untouched flanks, and you thought something looked wrong about the story someone told you, you were probably right about something. If you've got a case from your own coastline, drop it in the comments. Somebody working the same question needs it. Now, I want to take you to what happened on the water after. This is the case I find hardest to argue away. A shark researcher goes to check acoustic tag receivers at a known Pacific aggregation site, the kind of place where the same tagged individuals return year after year on a predictable window. The grid was empty, not partially. The animals were gone. Here's what makes the case land. The bait was there. The seasonal upwelling was on schedule. The water was in the right range. Nothing about the environment had told the sharks to leave, but the receivers had also picked up orca movements in the area, or a documented predation event had occurred nearby, and the tagged white sharks had displaced, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for the whole season. In one well-known case at Seal Island in South Africa, the pattern extended for years after port and starboard entered the system. Individual sharks that had returned to that island every winter for as long as researchers had been tracking them simply stopped. Read what that means slowly. White sharks, animals with long-term spatial memory, animals that return to the same aggregation sites across their lifetimes, are encoding threat information. They're not reacting reflexively. They're updating a map, and when they update it at the population level. This is where the word apex starts doing more work than the biology supports. Apex predators are supposed to hold territory, not vacate it. The great white shark, in the presence of a specific class of orca, behaves like a mesopredator, an animal that yields ground to something larger and more coordinated. That doesn't mean the great white is no longer a formidable predator. It means the ceiling of the Pacific food web is higher than the picture in most people's heads. Here's what I want you to try before you leave this video. Look up the stranding records for your own Pacific coastline. Most state and provincial marine agencies keep them, and many are public. Look at the necropsy notes on shark strandings from the last decade. Look at the bite geometry, the organ inventory, and the presence or absence of feeding damage. Then cross-check the orca sighting logs from the same weeks. Those are also often public, kept by whale research organizations along the coast. You don't need to trust me. The pattern will show itself. Now, the last piece, and it's the piece that changes the shape of the whole question. The identity of the predator isn't the mystery. Orcas hunt sharks. That's been on the record in various forms for a long time. The mystery, the shouldn't be possible part, is the specialization. It appears from everything documented so far that only certain orca ecotypes and, in specific cases, specific individual animals have converged on this technique. Port and starboard, the Farallones pod, a handful of others. That's a small number of animals rewriting the behavioral profile of an entire species' predators. And because orcas transmit hunting techniques culturally, mother to calf, pod to pod, a technique that pays this well in calories tends to spread. That's the piece that hasn't fully played out in the record yet. How many orcas are learning it? How wide the technique is going? Whether this is an old behavior we're only now instrumented enough to catch, or a genuinely spreading one? Those are open questions, and I'm not going to pretend I know the answer. What I will tell you is what the evidence weighing looks like from here. When you hear a wildlife claim of this shape, ask what the physical evidence actually is. The footage, the necropsied geometry, the tissue analysis. Ask about the witnesses, the researchers who've spent decades at a specific site, the fisheries officers, the veteran captains who've watched the water change. Ask whether the biology makes it plausible, whether the caloric return, the dietary flexibility, the cultural transmission we already know exists in cetaceans could carry the behavior. Ask what the historical record supports and when it started changing. Ask whether the language in journals and agency reports has quietly shifted from anomalous to documented, and ask what residue is left after every honest filter is applied. The question stops being, is it real? The question becomes, which piece of the ocean map does this specific case redraw? Here's where I'll leave you. The picture of the Pacific with a single apex predator sitting untouched at its top is a picture that no longer matches the water. When great whites vanish from a site, that's not necessarily their absence from the ocean. It might be information about who else has arrived. Trust your senses when the evidence stacks up. Stay honest about the fraction of reports that will always dissolve under scrutiny. And when a shark you've watched for years stops showing up where it always has, remember that the animal made a choice, and the choice is telling you something. If you want the next case in this thread, another apex hierarchy that turned out to be less settled than the textbook implied, I've got one queued up on a different ocean and a different predator entirely. I'll see you there.